Question number 5. Approximately 1 year ago, we were hit by 2 Category 5 hurricanes, Irma and Maria. With unprecedented losses and destruction in the Virgin Islands in the area of multi-millions of dollars. Question number 1, part A. What would you have done what would you do to continue the recovery? And B is, what would you do to mitigate the effects of future hurricanes, earthquakes, or tsunamis? That is your question, Mellon Young.
Immediacy is what I would have done. I would have immediately looked at my plan, which was supposed to have been done, because I'm hearing things about the plan, but I don't believe that the book was even open. After the hurricane, I tried as a senator to be involved in the response. And of course, we're not written into the response as policymakers, but it was unprecedented, 2 Cat 5s, and we were rebuffed. The lieutenant governor invited me to a task force, and the governor disinvited me from the task force. And I decided, let me go to Puerto Rico, see how we have the federal officials and the local officials work with each other. And I was able to see a difference in how information was exchanged with the policymakers in Puerto Rico. And I happened to be in the position to be in Puerto Rico and be airlifted to DC, where the majority leader of the Senate and the minority leader of the Senate and several other congressional leaders, to include our delegate, met with us. The majority leader of Puerto Rico, Camilo Rios, and the minority leader of the Senate of Puerto Rico, Mr. Eduardo Batia. And the 3 of us were able to go to all these Congress people to plead for the first amount of money to be given. And when I sat with a Senate Majority Leader of the states, Mitch McConnell, he said, well, the first request was just about $130 million. And I said, impossible. With the destruction that I saw, $130 million is just hardly enough. And we need to put in money and cushion money for economic development, because as all of this is happening, we need to uplift ourselves. We need to start getting our industries going. We cannot just rely on construction, which the response would be mostly on construction. And so I continue to as of yesterday, I signed a letter with these very leaders so that we can go back and we can say, listen, we are being promised billions of dollars, but we're not seeing them. I mean, we're not blind. So one point, how many billions of dollars? I forget, because I don't even see the first millions of dollars being spent. So we have to be honest with each other first and foremost. The federal government told us reimbursable, and what happens with reimbursable? You have to spend and then get reimbursed, and the governor doesn't want to do that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for your response. Candidate Diasi Kofeld.
I'd like to start with mitigating the effects first. Preparation, preparation, preparation. Incident command system. Dwight Nicholson, my running mate, is trained in the incident command system. That was a failure, absolute failure. I got very emotional answering a similar question in St. Thomas the other night. Why did I get so emotional? Because I saw so much unnecessary suffering. After Irma, which hit St. Thomas, we had this governor making our people stand in long lines in the hot sun for hours. Women with children, with small children, senior citizens, they were standing in lines at 3 distribution centers, only 3 distribution centers. They'd get to the front of the line, and what would they be told? No water. They've run out of water. They've run out of food. They've run out of tarps. And the people were really suffering. It was just unconscionable. I immediately started saying, open up the distribution centers, go to the churches, the synagogues, the mosques. Those entities know what the people need. And it took this governor months and months and months to do that. In the meantime, he's sitting at Government House in air conditioning and having a West Indian buffet with the gentleman from FEMA. He set that up at a press conference while we were sitting eating crackers and sardines. So we're going to be prepared. And I will be a governor that will be on the ground. I will be visiting the shelters as I was teaching. I was there reading actually to the children at the Lockhart Center for many, many months. And the governor, they said, did not even come to that shelter until one day I was driving out of the parking lot, and in come these black SUVs. And who was there but the governor, with the governor of New York, Mr. Cuomo. That was the first time he had gotten to the center. But we will be a team that will be on the ground, actually suffering with the people and talking to the people, knowing what the people are going through, not eating a West Indian buffet when our people are eating sardines and crackers. And what else will we do? We will make sure that we continue the efforts that have started, but we will be financially accountable and transparent. As I mentioned before already, that we are being told all this money is coming in from the federal government, but what do we see happening? A few little patches on roads, and after a couple of months, the potholes are back? That's unacceptable. Is that what the federal government is paying? No, that's a result of not following through and making sure that our money, we the people's money, is being spent properly. We will go in and we will make sure that the leaks are all stopped up. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Albert Ryan.
The first thing I would do is to find out what really is going on. I don't really trust what I hear, and I'm hearing sporadic information about what's really going on. And I would be transparent with that information so you know what's going on as well. I would find a territorial emergency operation plan. We had it when I was at Commissioner of Labor. It told you what to do for disasters from step A to Z, before the storm, during the storm, and after, for each commissioner. I think it's also important to expedite housing. You have to anticipate what's going to happen next. We're about to get a housing shock, and the rents in the Virgin Islands are going to go through the roof. We've seen this before, so we need to get emergency housing here, not only for people, but for people who need to work. I think attacking the electrical problem at one time was a great idea. We need to do that again for the roads, for the hospital, and for the schools. Let's get a cruise ship out there and get people and fix these things back immediately. Hoard cash. I think it's important, because it's reimbursable, that we create a fund so we can hoard cash and make sure we have cash to keep paying vendors to make sure that the recovery is constant and we don't have gluts in the system because we can't pay. Train. A lot of this is paperwork. If you don't do your administrative and your paperwork right, you end up losing a lot of federal money. We need to train our people to make sure that they're doing the paperwork and putting it in the first time. For future disaster, I think what we need to do is we need to harden our communication systems. We should have we should have universal internet in the Virgin Islands, and in the event of a storm, it should be bumped up, and all the cell phones now can connect through the internet, so we'd all be able to speak, even though we were suffering from AT&T outages. With GPS, the most vulnerable. You get a senior card, we have your ID, where you live, we could find you. In an event of a storm, we can immediately locate you once you have that card. Practice. We have to practice in order to be prepared for a storm, so we have to drill for all kinds of emergencies. We need to hire an emergency professional for FEMA, somebody that actually has been through an emergency and knows how to access the resources and what to do in the event of a storm. My handwriting is bad, I forgot one. But we have to depoliticize this process, and we have to move now, just like my slogan, in order to make sure that we are hardened and ready for anything that may happen to us. Because it doesn't have to be a storm. It could be a tsunami. It could be a terrorist attack. It could be a tornado. So we have to make sure that we're ready and prepared for the next event.
Thank you for your response. Kenneth Mapp.
Thank you. The emergency operations plan that the government has, we did utilize a good portion of that, but I made immediate changes in terms of how I would respond to an emergency when we had the major training session with a number of state National Guards and FEMA and federal emergency response teams in the U.S. Virgin Islands. We get great kudos from the U.S. government and specifically from the Federal Emergency Management Agency for how we very early on embedded the folks at FEMA in with the cabinet just prior to the arrival of the storms and created a strategy to work through the storms and response to the storms. I think many people in the Virgin Islands can attest to the fact that very early on, from 7 a.m. of the morning when Irma passed, and again in St. Croix with Maria, I was already out in the street with National Guard people, and I was out with the VIPD. I don't know where Ms. Kofel gets her information about my schedule and what shelters I visit or don't visit. That sounds like a runaway train. But the point that I would like to make is that the response to the disasters have to be clear and concise, and your federal partners need to know what your priorities are. And we have been able to demonstrate that. I don't believe I'm hearing anyone on this panel saying that I should have gone to Puerto Rico and they would have helped us get more resources, because there is no question on the record that there are people in Puerto Rico who have not even been connected to power, who doesn't have water, who does not have the resources that they're requesting from the federal government. And so this business of following somebody else, even when they're going off the cliff, that we must do because we don't have the confidence in ourselves as Virgin Islanders to work and to deliver to our people. Are there lessons to learn from the responses of Irma and Maria? Yes. Specifically, learning the lesson in terms of when we have to do medical evacuations, how we do that in a more sensible way and sensitive way to provide and ensure that not only the patient is going to facility, but some family member is going. How do we engage the public health service earlier in that particular process? How we bring medical practitioners and medical support services to the Virgin Islands on a more rapid basis to really deal with the issues that are affecting members of the community.
Thank you for your response. Senator Don to start.
Thank you. There's an old saying, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. There's so many different variables. There's so many different variables when it comes to preparedness. And one of the essential components of being able to conduct or even have an effective recovery process in the wake of any disaster is your ability to communicate. That is essential. I believe that under Donna Stork-Hansen administration, we would be prepared to ensure that every single commission and head of government agencies that are all interconnected have a satellite phone, that they're able to communicate through a different medium. You see, after the hurricane, I was able to traverse around the islands and make my way to the radio station. And I sat in a radio station for over 6 hours and had to pause while I was trying to offer comfort to the people of the Virgin Islands during that period. And the very governor couldn't even get in because I believe you were using a conventional phone, the regular typical AT&T phone or Sprint phone, which most of the system was down. We have to understand, and if you go back to Maryland, we should have learned from Maryland. And I must commend former Governor Snyder, who had satellite phones in place, and most of the leadership was able to communicate. We sat there and listened to a commissioner on the radio telling contractors to make their way down to public works, not even being sure if they had a clear path to get to public work. So you see, those are the mistakes that we have made. I was involved in the drafting of the VITEMA bill. You could check the record. And I must give him a lot of credit. Alexander Farley, God rest his soul, who was able to maverick that piece of legislation through the Senate, recognizing the contributions of former Senator Bingley Richardson. We spent months drafting that piece of legislation. I know the contribution and all the players. And if you follow it and not divert from it, it can in fact work. Now I understand that sometimes you have to use your discretion when it comes to leadership. And I would like to take this opportunity because I'm disturbed by this. How could you evacuate people out of the Virgin Islands and not, medical evacuees, and not have a tracking system? And left them in the United States, abandoned, and they're struggling. And do you know that it's over 52 of them are now deceased as a result of that stress? That is not sensible, and that is not sensitive.
Mr. Smith.
As perhaps the only person on this panel that actually worked as the mass care coordinator for this territory for almost 20 years, I think I have a little experience in what it means to establish preparation as well as recovery. As the interim and acting and deputy commissioner for the Department of Human Services for almost 20 years, I had the task of ensuring that during and before storms that we had shelters in place, we had feeding in place, we had evacuations to shelters in place, and after the storm, coordinate with the federal government for the individual and family programs, which have been changed to a different name now. In recovery, one thing that a Smith-Frederick administration would ensure is that the people of the Virgin Islands maintain what we call a all hazards at all time readiness profile. We should be ready for any and all types of disasters at any time. That's something that we will implement in the schools, a culture of being prepared. Because right now we know that with global warming, climate change as they call it, we could be subject to any type of hurricane or seismic activity at any time. The recovery aspects include a number of things, but it starts first from planning. And what we did not do leading up to the storm or leading up to those events was plan. I helped write the Territorial Emergency Operation Plan. And I know that as of 2010, we had a plan. In 2017, many aspects of that plan were never exercised because the most important piece, which is the medical piece, never met. They never met. Now, mitigation must include a few things: infrastructure, processes, and people. We need to ensure that the processes and infrastructure are tested, that the people and the systems are well known, and that our people have the right information at the right time so that the community can make the decisions that are necessary that affect their families. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Moser.
Yeah. You know, I think the fact, when I hear Albert say he didn't know, tells us we're all learning a lot for the first time by listening to the governor now. This information has been not available to people, and I appreciate hearing it. Although, anyway, look, I talked before, we have a management and a finance problem, and they've all described the management issues, but let's not forget the finance problem. Okay, $220 million came to us from the refinery sale, which disappeared into operating expenses. I'm not saying it went any place wrong, but it disappeared into paying people and operating expenses. And every possible reserve we had was drained for operating expenses with nothing to show for it. So when we hit the day before the storm, we had something like, if the numbers were correct, $60 million in payable and maybe a day or two cash on hand. And the government had a structural deficit of $150 million. And so there's no way you can be prepared and do all these things we want to do if you can't pay for any of them. So what we're looking at now is the same thing, okay? We've had what almost looks like a scorched earth policy. That's when one army retreats, they just burn everything so the people coming through have nothing left. So right now we're looking at structural deficit, who knows how high? Some of the senators are saying 200 million, who knows, okay? We're looking at 150 million of unpaid vendors. We're looking at 40 million unpaid WAPA bills, the unfunded liability for the GERS. And then if we manage to get $10 million, then, oh, we have money for a new hotel. Okay, sure, if you don't pay anything else, okay? So, all right, so, you know, look, what I'm saying is I'm ready to step in and do the things to make the serious money we need to bring it in, and not from taxing everybody on a sin tax where some guys, you know, somebody's working hard all day and goes home to have a beer and we try and tax that guy. Our government has always taxed the people who have nothing. Every tax I've seen passed in the last 15 years has been going after the people who have nothing. It's the most regressive tax structure I've ever seen. You know, I don't do that. Nobody's ever come after me for any taxes, okay? And
Because you don't pay any.
yeah,
You
What's
don't
that?
pay any.
yeah. All right. Thank you. Anyway, so I'll be, you know, I've outlined some of the ways we can bring in the serious money that we need. We can bring it in without taxing ourselves, and we can get ourselves into prosperity and preparedness.
Yes, she is. She's a rebut.